Test. Okay, that should do it. Yep. So we're recording, so that's why I'm wearing the mic. Did you get the recording started? All right, thanks, Brad. So thank you. We're talking about GitHub Coding Agent. So for those of you that heard my talk last week, I was talking about the top 9 things that came out of build. Well, this was number 1. So that's what we're talking about here, is this brand new thing that was just released 3 weeks ago and how it fits in. And I want to highlight, we still can't do hands right. How many thumbs and fingers does this guy have? Someday. We're in trouble when they can do hands correctly. So as mentioned, I do work for New Resources Consulting. I lead up the AI solutions group there. We also do an assortment of other consulting services. So if anyone is interested in learning more, please reach out to myself or John. And as I mentioned, the AI practice director. I'm a Microsoft MVP for artificial intelligence for 6 years running now. I largely consider myself a technologist. I've kind of given up on trying to pigeonhole myself. I just do stuff with technology, and hopefully it's good stuff sometimes. So I was really specialized in deep learning, and then this whole generative AI thing took off, and now I do most of my work in generative AI. I kind of got my start as a cloud architect, and I did a foray into mixed reality. Love to talk about any of those topics. And Azure Service Bus is an awesome next topic, speaking of cloud architecture. So I know I recognize so many faces out here, but I'll still ask, who are you? So how many people would associate themselves more as a business side? And technical? I presume the rest of the room? Okay. Double dipping back there. I like it. And how many of you would say that you're a leader? You lead a team, an org, something like that? Okay, great. So we've got a really diverse room here. And how many of you are somehow using AI in your day-to-day job? Okay, good work, everyone. We don't have to have that talk to start off. So I want to start at the end, and this should be super exciting because we're doing this via Teams. So this video is probably going to run terribly. But so this is the marketing video for this particular feature. So I want to start there, and then we'll kind of work our way backwards from there. I swear I got the audio working. Okay, I'm not going to burn a lot of time on that. So let me restart it. You guys can, I'll narrate it. It's just fancy music anyway going on. So agent mode is what we already had. And so that was existing prior to build this year. And so that's kind of where they're starting. But now we're seeing Copilot agent. And so the idea of Copilot agent is now bringing it into my GitHub Enterprise and suddenly having that assistant that I can work with. And so that's what we're going to dig into here. And trust me, the music track that went with this was phenomenal. But it kind of ruins my video. So GitHub Copilot is the thing that already exists. How many people are using GitHub Copilot? Okay, good chunk of the room. So we're not here to talk about that. How many people are using agent mode? Okay, a smaller subset. So just in review, GitHub Copilot is your AI pair programmer. We've had ask edit mode for quite a while, and that's where I can go in there and I can say, hey, I need a function that does this, a method that does this, find the bug in this chunk of code, something along those lines, right? So that's ask edit mode. So that's what they kind of originally released with. More recently, we've gotten agent mode. So agent mode, now I can just give it these more broad concepts like I could say, rewrite this entire thing using this particular technology stack. 15, 20 minutes later, it will do that. It'll have a bunch of edits and I can work with it. So agent mode, I believe that's in public preview is the state of that particular feature right now. And it's really phenomenal. If you haven't used it yet and you have a GitHub Copilot license, you should check it out. If you've been heard of Cursor, this is very much a competitive feature with Cursor. The big plus about this feature is I don't have to use a weird fork of VS Code. I can actually use this in VS Code proper. So that's kind of why I like it more than what we have with Cursor and the assortment of other ones. And so here's an example. I guess most of the room, it sounds like, is already here. But so there's agent mode. That's how you get to it. And they're giving this big, broad conceptual idea of I want you to go do this big thing, and it's going out there and doing it. And when I was first introduced to this, the first thing I did is I asked it, could you refactor this to use Fast API instead of Flask? This thing I had in production, and Flask is kind of outdated at this point, so refactor it. 20 minutes later, it had rewritten all my code, rewritten my unit tests. It wrote a README file explaining what it did so that I could understand what it was doing, and it didn't actually work, right? I would give it that it was 80 to 90% done. But what I tell people is about that feature is 80 to 90% done is all right. So that took something that would have taken me maybe 5 days and made it into a one-day task. So that's pretty darn good, and that brings a lot of value to the team. So what I often tell clients, and I'll move on after this, is if you are not using GitHub Copilot or some other tool like it with your team, you're kind of being irresponsible with your company's money. Because if there was any other way I could tell you, where I said, give me $20 a month and I'll make that person 40% more productive, you would be tripping over yourselves to give me $20. Well, there it is. So just anybody that's not out there using it, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir based on the hands here, but that's kind of my 2 cents. So we're not here to talk about that, though. We're here to talk about Coding Agent. So this was announced at Microsoft Build about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And so this is kind of the next step in this concept. It's kind of a sister product to GitHub Copilot. And I found it to be super exciting. So to dig into this, because I really need some code bases to work with, we're going to look at 2 different code bases here. So I need to introduce you guys to these code bases. So the first one is I was one of the authors of C# Advent of Code last year. And so I did a little lesson, I think it was day 17 of Advent, on how do I use AI to prompt AI. So that is this example. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this example, and well, maybe I'll start by just showing it. I think that's a good place to start. Let's run it real quick and see how it works. So, and I should warn you guys, we pretty much ran through all my slides. This is going to be all demos, so this is going to be a lot of how the sausage is made, or how the sausage has failed to be made, depending on how it goes. But so here's the GitHub page for it. This is under my personal. And there's a README about it, and basically it was a tutorial meant to be a 1-hour little project that taught you something about AI. Right, so here's the description and all of that stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to fork this repo, and we're going to work with it with GitHub Agent. At least I thought I was going to fork. Oh, I need to sign in. Oh, this should be fun. A better speaker would have signed in before I started talking. Hey, that went well, though. Okay. So now I've already got a fork that I've done, and that's my just in case this goes terrible fork. But we're going to create a new one. We're going to call this something shorter to type. WI notes. And I'm going to put this into one of my company accounts. And the reason I'm doing that is because it has the proper licensing set up. So at the end, I'll show you guys the licensing that's needed and how you configure this in your own spot. But for now, just know that that's the reason that I'm going into a different. And this should only take a few seconds, which it did. All right, so now I've got a fork to work with. And in this fork, what we'll do is we'll start by cloning this. Okay, good. And so the reason I don't have all of this all pre-prepped for this is because every time I do something, it kind of changes the state here. As we're moving forward, I want you guys to see kind of a real demo that's realistic and accurate to the real experience. So I just cloned my repo. I've got it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up this solution file. And we're going to run this thing, just so you guys can see the baseline of what we're starting with. And I intentionally picked something that's fairly hello worldish, so we don't get bogged down too much. So the idea of this is I can enter in an inspirational thought about Christmas, because remember, this was an Advent thing. Santa Claus and his elves. And then I can hit this button, and we should throw an exception. So it's throwing an exception because I smartly didn't check in my key into my public GitHub repository. Not that I've ever done that before. So that's an exception, and I wanted to highlight that because that's going to be one of the examples of things that we're going to look at in just a minute. And now, if I can get this to cooperate a little bit better, now you guys can all, I want to see who can memorize this key. So we're going to put a key in there. So I do want to show how this actually is supposed to work. Santa and oh, that's disappointing. Did I do something bad with my key? Oh, yep, there it is. Yeah, but each time I have to retype it. Well, and so part of the shtick here, though, is that an AI went and enhanced that and actually made it into a better prompt so that we get a good picture. So that was the lesson we were trying to learn here, or to teach in the original example. And so we're going to get, and this is kind of cheesy by today's standards, right? As you guys can all do way better than this with, 16 different models at this point. Pick your poison. But so that's how this application works. So that's kind of our baseline and our starting point. So now let's dig back in. So we've got it, we've cloned it. So let's look at demo one. So the first demo is what we're going to do, and I'm going to just steal this, is we're going to create an issue. So I'm going to create, and I don't have issues enabled. Well, that's fun. Who remembers where that option is in here to turn on? Anybody? Thank you. There we go. Like I said, how the sausage is made in real time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this issue. And so the issue is not that. Okay. Really? So who else is helpless with only one monitor? That would be me. So I lost my PowerPoint now. Copy. Now you all saw I did it that time. All right, to heck with it. So no key here. So the issue is that when the app has no key, it throws an exception. We should handle that gracefully. Okay, so I'm going to write a really lousy issue. Nobody's ever written a lousy issue before. But so I'm going to create this, similar to what you would do. But so here's the interesting part now. We're going to go over to assignees, and we have my paired programmer. Uh-oh. 1 second. I forgot to run. Now you're really seeing. You're going to want me to be able to zoom, though. There we go. So now we've got an additional team member called Copilot. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign this to Copilot. And when we assign it to Copilot, we're essentially saying, hey, this is yours, and we want you to take responsibility for it. So now I've made that, you can see it's assigned to Copilot now. And you can see we got these little eyeballs here. So whenever Copilot is actually looking at something, it throws this emoticon down. Because every large language model loves a good emoticon. So we're going to step away from this for a second and kind of let this run in the background while we look at some other things. Because the one thing about this is it's not instant. Right, so just like if I assign this to somebody else, it's not going to get done instantly just because I've assigned it. And you switched on me. So example 2, and we're going to swap back and forth between 2 examples because while one of them is doing something, we're going to talk about the other one. So this one is a personal project of mine. It's called Board Game Copilot, and it's not super important what it actually does because we're going to only look at one component of it. But essentially, it's an AI that you can pick your favorite board game and ask it questions about rules and stuff like that. So this project is the first one that I started using this for real with. So when I came back from build, I was like, I want to start using this right away. So I got this up and running with this project, and I took a look at, there was one feature I'd been dreading implementing because it was just going to be a pain in the butt. So I was like, this is the perfect thing I can do. So I had the AI work through implementing all of the different bits of the feature. And so we're gonna dig into a little bit of that work that I did there. Describe it. So And actually, so let's go back to the other example and see what's gone on. So what is, oh, I'm sorry. What happened here? Oh, this is not good. Thank you. So this is what happened while we're gone. So what you've noticed is that Copilot mentioned that. And so what actually happened too is I just got an email in my email account asking me to do a design review. So once it gets finished, it says, could you please do a code review? And it would give me a link to this PR. No different than working with one of your coworkers. And so here's the work as it's gone. Yeah. Apparently it's not done yet. So, well, we can start reviewing it anyway, though. So you can see it made a plan of how it's going to try and approach this issue. So it's analyzing the code base. It's confirming that the key is an empty string. It's going through. So it's got this checklist. So it's working down this checklist. So initially it creates this plan of how it's going to try and tackle the problem. Then it starts working its way down here within this PR. And in fact, we can go and take a look. Maybe if I can find my mouse cursor, we can go and watch what it's doing. So this button right here views the session. And so this is what the AI is actually thinking. So it's using a reasoning model. So there's a lot of reasoning going on here. And we can go and take a look at what's transpiring. So we can see that it's been working on this for 4 minutes. It's made 19 premium requests. So there is a certain limit to how much you can actually use. And as it's going here, it's showing you exactly what it's thinking about. We can see it walking through the repository, reading through the code base, and it's a fairly simple code base. We can see it looking to see if I had any unit tests. I did not. We can see it trying to build the project. So this is a really interesting aspect of this, is that it will actually go and create a GitHub code space and try and build your project so that it can actually see how it works, watch the project executing, and also so it can try its changes. So in my experience, you will get much worse results if it is not able to actually build your code, which is what happened here. And the reason that it cannot build this code, just to share with you guys, is because this particular app uses WinUI 3. This is one of the 3 applications in the world that uses WinUI 3 at this point. So I chose to build it with WinUI 3. That does not compile on Linux. This only knows how to build stuff on top of Linux at the moment. So that is a feature that will be coming, but at the moment, so there is no way it can successfully build this. But even without being able to build it, it'll still go after it. No different than your junior developer that couldn't figure out how to build the code on their machine, but was like, oh, I need to really get this done. Otherwise, I'm going to get yelled at. So let's start flailing around changing code and hoping for the best, right? It's doing that right now. So now it's going through the code and we can see the logic. And so why it's really important that it shares this with us is when we start doing something more complicated, because this is a pretty softball one, right? This is easy. We just need to check if that field's blank and give the right error message. So pretty simple. It's probably going to succeed on this. No guarantee, but it probably will. But imagine we're doing something much, much more complicated and we get that end result and we're like, boy, you're not even close. We can actually go in here and look and see where the logic went off the rails. And we can then give it feedback and say, you know, when you were thinking this through, you thought I meant this, but what I really meant this, and tell it to try again. So we can kind of go and correct it and tell it where its logic went wrong. So that's why it's really important to be able to to get a view like this into it. And so now it's having this this inner monologue with itself, telling itself, perfect, now I can see there's a teaching tip component, and so on. It's quite amusing to watch how polite it is with itself as it's talking to itself in its head. But anyway, it goes on, and we can kind of see the results as it's going through here, doing implementations, running bash commands. And that's what's really, I thought, to me, was really unexpected to see that it won't hesitate, but to throw something into a command prompt and execute it if that's what it needs to understand what's going on. So, so it's still thinking to itself. We can see it patted itself on the back again. Great job. And it will not hesitate, but to keep doing that. Oh, no. Perfect. So you'll see, and that's a lot of, that comes down to a lot of how these large language models are trained, right? They try and bake in this politeness. So even when it's talking to itself, it's very polite with itself, which is kind of odd to look at. I think what would be fun is if they enabled like a Grok model to go with this, and you could see it telling itself it was stupid and stuff as it's going. That would be entertaining, and I would be interested. I think it would be interesting to see if that actually gave it better results too, as it's reasoning. If it's not constantly patting itself on the back, but giving itself more realistic feedback. But anyhow, so this is still working. So we'll let this go in the background and find something else to keep talking about here. So in fact, so let's go back to the other project. So let's take a look at one of the more complicated things I've done with this. And so I'm going to take us into a particular pull request where things got complicated and kind of walk you through how it played out. So going back to that app now, if you remember, the idea of it was to help you with board games. Well, the secret sauce to it is that it learns about each individual board game. So it has its own set of learning. So that means that it only is able to handle ones it's learned about. So right now there's about 30 of them. So one of the big features that was needed was the ability to release new games without doing a new release into the iOS and Android store, because releasing an app into the iOS and Android store is painful, and you don't want to do it over and over again. So I've been putting this off for a long time because there were a lot of moving parts to getting this working. And so, so let's go and look at the impressive issue that I wrote about this. So here's the issue. Apps should check for new games and expansions and update during startup. When the application starts, the app should use the games service to update the games and expansions stored in the cache. The user should see a screen with the status screen while this is happening, stating that the app is updating. This should include a progress bar as well. Once this update is complete, the app flow should continue as normal. Significantly more complicated than I'm asking it to figure out here. And I even tried to give it a hint and say, hey, use this service inside this application to do this, to kind of nudge it in the right direction. So let's go back into the PR. So we can see it came up with, it worked its way through a plan, and then it came up with this implementation. And it said it's going to create this new page, makes sense. And that updated page should have a dedicated class. So basically it created a model for that. It modified the startup page to call that instead of the main page. Whoops. Sorry. Get you guys dizzy doing that. We added error handling, added telemetry tracking. So this app is fully instrumented with telemetry. So it noticed that and it decided, oh, I better add a new event into the telemetry to tell it that that's happening. And it's like, oh, that's great. I didn't even think about that, although that was needed. And then implemented navigation flow. Sounds like it killed it. It did not, but it did a pretty good job. So it did an initial plan for this, and now because this is fairly complicated, if we go look at the session, and this would be session 1, we can see that it did a lot of thinking, and eventually it gave me a PR to review. And so here's an interesting feature here. So I started going back and forth like this, like I would with another developer, right? So when I reviewed it, I said, well, that's not quite right. And I gave it feedback. I didn't just go and fix it myself. I gave it feedback, and then it started thinking again. So that's why we have session 2, is when it took that feedback and ran with it. And you can see how many tries it took before I got where I wanted to be. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, 9 times back and forth, that sounds frustrating. Well, sort of, but sort of not, because the thing I quickly realized is using a feature like this, instead of just doing one issue at a time, I can do multiple issues at a time. I can fire off this issue, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. I hit a point where I was doing 6 issues simultaneously because the Copilot was working on them while I was working on the next one. I was just plowing forward, and really allowed me to get a lot more done in the same amount of time. But anyway, let's look at the results here. So let's take a look at... so here's an interesting tidbit too. I found this to be a really interesting behavior. You would think that that would just be one commit, right? It would figure out what it's going to do and do one commit, but it actually did 3 separate commits before it sent it to me for a design review. So it kind of thoughtfully said, this is one unit of stuff I'm going to implement. It committed that. Then it went and figured out the next bit and the next bit. Again, more akin to what a human would do in this situation. So let's take a look at some of those changes. Maybe. Come on, Wi-Fi. So this one, in this one, we can see that it added the load-in page, and it did this. And what's really interesting here is, anybody that's done cross-platform work knows that trying to make the same UI work on iOS and Android is a bit of a nightmare. So for this one, I'm using something called Blazor Hybrid, which sits on top of Maui, which, well, I won't go down that path, but so I'm using that for this project. And so basically what that means is I'm displaying a Blazor web page is the app, essentially. And so what I ended up doing is having a special CSS style sheet that fixes iOS, right? And so interestingly, it saw that and it brought that over into this. And I found that to be really impressive behavior. So it understood that there's a pattern in all of my different web pages that are in this application. And it brought that pattern forward and did it correctly, as it would happen. But we can see it created a page, and so the kind of the interesting part about this is the page that it created is really, really ugly, but it was correct, right? And I didn't tell it to make it pretty. I didn't tell it how I wanted the stuff laid out, so it was kind of fair. And so how I responded to that as a developer using this tool is I said, okay, that's fine. Let's get this working how I wrote the issue and get it with an ugly page. And then the very next issue I wrote was saying, that page is ugly. Here's how we're going to adjust it. And then we chased it down in a future issue, which again is the smart thing that I would do personally, right? I'm not going to try and boil the ocean. I'm going to be happy that I got it working. And then I'm going to go back and make it look pretty or make it look right. So again, and I guess the point I'm making as I'm telling these stories is interacting with this is surprisingly like interacting with another human being. And I think that's why I found this to be so compelling. That's how I wanted GitHub Copilot to be in my VS Code. I always wanted it to be like, hey, Copilot buddy, here's what we're working on, let's do it. And it never quite got there. I was always kind of trying to fish for it to do the thing I wanted it to do, telling it the way I described it. This feels more like I'm just talking to, I'm talking to Dave and we're working on it together and we're passing it back and forth. And that was really powerful, and it really encouraged me to just keep working with it. But anyway, so built that, and noticed that I liked my code in a separate file, so it followed that pattern as well. It didn't just jam it into the Razor, and it did the dependency injection the same style that I was doing throughout the rest of the application. There's a few different ways you can tackle that problem, but so that was a really interesting thing, is it tried to mimic the style of the rest of the application. So doing what a good developer would do, right? Which is trying to make the app, my other screen just died. Well, anyway, that'll be fun. But it tried to make the app just like what, in the same style that I was already using. And here you can see in the tracking service where it actually added that event, which I didn't even tell it to do in the issue, but it realized that should be done. So that was really cool too. And so what that's really showing is that it's taking the time to truly understand your code and not just trying to follow to the letter what you're doing, but trying to put something in there. Like that would be another thing that, if I was working with another person, I would expect them to pick up on that and realize that in this application, this should be an event. So it updated the interface, and it did the tracking service. And it added that little bit in there, which was all phenomenal. And so as we go further though, let's go back to the PR. So let's look at more at the conversation that transpired. So as I dug into this, I took a look at things and I said, well, some of these things aren't quite right. And so what I actually did is I gave it feedback. And I said, so here, this was the comment. The underscore game service is never used. Why was it added? It started injecting something, but it never used it. So I gave it that feedback, and it said, you're absolutely right. I removed the unused field, and so it fixed it. And so that's another aspect that you can do with this, is you can then go, when you do a review, it's going to actually read those comments and do something about those comments like a real developer. So we can go take a look at another one. And here I said, why were these usings added? And it says, I removed these unused using statements. So, we went back and forth like this for a while. And it's super powerful stuff being able to do that. And eventually, we got to a point where I was satisfied with it, and we we checked in the PR. And so one of the things I've really noticed is that it writes a lot better comments and a lot better issue comments and stuff. It's got all this detail in there. Meanwhile, I started this whole thing with like 30 words, and it gives me all of these details, which is just phenomenal because it makes me look like I'm a lot more attentive to detail than I actually was. So let's go back. Now that we've kind of explored that example a little bit, let's go back to, let's go back to this one. And I believe this session is done. So yeah, now that the work is completed, and it actually sent me a review request. So it asked me to go and review that code. So this again enables and makes it really easy for you to be able to do multiple things at once, because I'm going to get that review request in my email just like I would if I was working with any of you guys out here. So let's go take a look at what we got. This will be pretty exciting stuff. So here's the solution. So added graceful error handling, API key validation, exception handling, user-friendly notifications, proper UI state management. That sounds pretty good. That sounds kind of on point. Let's see what code changes it actually made. So this is just like me too. This is totally something I would do. I'm going and fixing one issue, and I'm like, oh, that moron, he misspelled the word folder. And so it went and fixed that. That had nothing to do with the issue. Yeah, it was absolutely a good fix. And that, like I said, this went out in the advent of code, so thousands of people saw this typo. Well, or one, depending on how many people actually clicked through and actually did the activity, right? So a lot of these changes actually appear to be related to that. That's fun. Well, good job, Mr. AI. So where did it actually do what we were asking? So here's some exception handling, or some error handling, right? So if string is null or white space, open AI key, then it's going to throw an invalid operation exception. Sounds all right. Another check there, another check there. So seems like it got the gist of it. But for me, I'm lousy at reviewing unless I actually run it. So just for fun, let's run it real quick. So we're going to need to do a quick. So I was working with the client the other day, by the way, and I pulled up my Visual Studio, which was configured this way, and they said using the default theme made their eyes bleed. So how many of you guys changed this right away? I'm just curious. Okay, just a few. Okay, so I'm not the only one actually. I'm so used to this theme, I just can't leave it behind. Anyway, though, so let's pull that branch. So here's the branch. Goody, we have a conflict because I added the key. So let's merge. I was really hoping to merge in front of an audience tonight. So they're both right. I think that's going to be the only merge. Okay, that wasn't bad. So the first check is, will it build? And this isn't guaranteed because, as you saw, it's not able to actually build it. It did, though. And now I actually have a key there, so we probably want to remove that key, actually, to test how this works, don't we? Mm-hmm. Okay. Hey, look at that. So that's pretty competent. And now, like I said, that was a pretty softball, because I wanted the first demo to actually succeed. So we gave it a softball. But nonetheless, that's pretty impressive. So now me as a developer, I can say, well, I'm impressed. I knocked that issue out, and I did it while I was at lunch. So I'm going to go back in here, and we can merge this. And so here's the first thing that surprised me, by the way, is so we're going to review it. Oh, I guess I don't have the safeguards in place, but normally I'd have a safeguard on any of my repos that would say at least one reviewer before I'm allowed to merge a PR, right? Or something along those lines. That or better would be on any of my repos. So in that case, Copilot does not count. So if I review Copilot's work and I say thumbs up, that's still counted as though I wrote it and I reviewed it. So that was a little bit of a surprise for me. And especially tricky when you're doing a project that's a one-man show, like the personal project I was showing before, right? But nonetheless, so I can merge this, and we've got, trying to decide if I want to merge this. Yeah, what the heck? Let's live on the edge. Like I said, we're seeing how the sausage is made tonight. So now I've merged that, right? So let's go back to the slide deck. I think we beat that to death. So let's take a look at demo 2. Well, demo 2 was supposed to be where it screwed up, but the results I'm going to fix them. So let's let's keep pushing forward now. But I guess what I would suggest to you guys is imagine the possibilities of what you're seeing here. This essentially makes you into a superhero coder. This is another moment like using GitHub Copilot where all of a sudden I am so much more effective as a developer and I'm just able to accomplish more. And I think that's the key element to it is I can now accomplish something that is so much bigger and broader than before. But so let's go a little bit beyond the basics. So we took a look at some very basic things we can do there. That's nice for the hello world examples, but when we're doing a real example, we need to give it some guidance and we need to give it some custom instructions. So since my other screen died, I'm just going to keep going without displaying PowerPoint properly. So the idea is I can give Copilot some information, some custom instructions about how I want it to behave within my code base. I can tell it things about my code base that I want it to know about every single time. And so how do we do that? We do that by adding a file. So we're going to, well, let's start by getting clean. So we're going to go back to main. And we're going to do a poll real quick. Okay, so that's after we just merged in our last change. So now we're there. And let's create a new branch real quick. GitHub stuff. Excellently named. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called .github. Maybe. I'm going to try that one more time. GitHub. Oh, it is there. Oh, well. And then inside that folder, we're going to create a file called copilotinstructions.md. So inside of there, and now I guess we're going to fail at copying and pasting again. Let's find out. Oh, good. So inside of there, I'm writing some Markdown. And this Markdown is giving me some basic directions about how I want to behave. So the first thing is a prime directive. So this is not something that Microsoft baked in. This is something people have already figured out. And this is the same file that you can use with GitHub Copilot as well. So if you're using GitHub Copilot in your tooling, it will actually respect this file as well as GitHub Coding Agent. But so people have figured out that if you say prime directive, it knows that that's something super important. Apparently it's a Star Trek fan. And so in this case, we're saying be chatting and teach about what you are doing while coding. Now, I didn't write that one. I would probably use better English, maybe. But nonetheless, so telling it that we want it to be very chatty and explain what it's doing. And that's helpful for when you're going and looking at the results of what it did. And then we're saying use modern technologies as described below for all code suggestions. Prioritize maintainable code, yada, yada, yada. Technology stack. For the front end, I want you to use WinUI 3. For the back end, C# only. Security considerations, never use hard-coded secrets. Right, so those are some basics. And now there isn't much to put in for the simple Hello World application, but imagine you're working on a very large, elaborate solution. This is your opportunity to kind of baseline it and guide it and make sure that it goes down the right path to begin with. And this is one of those things that you're going to start. You're going to build something basic like this, and then you're going to see where it screws up, and then you're going to start baking additional lines of information in here. What you're essentially doing is you're grounding the large language model with some pertinent instructions of how you want it to behave when it's doing its thing and when it's doing its thinking and when it's doing its reasoning. And so Microsoft has given quite a bit of effort into training it to follow these very carefully. So, and the point I'm making here is if you're going to start using this regularly, you're going to want to make this file And you're going to want to do the next one. So you're going to want to give it a file that tells it how to do that development environment. If you remember, it tries to build, right? So we can actually tell it how to build this thing properly. And so we're going to do that because if you remember, it failed to build it successfully. And so we're going to make a folder called workflow with an S, workflows. And then inside of there, Copilot setup steps.yaml. Copilot setup steps.yaml. So this is a standard GitHub Actions YAML file that explains to it how you want it to spin up the environment. So I prepared one in advance because I would fail miserably doing this on the fly. No. And putting it into a PowerPoint was a bad idea, apparently. So we can still see me fail miserably, but in a different way. Who? Thank you. $13. All right. It's like I have co-pilots right here in the room. Okay. Yeah. Here is my 10 cents. Well, imagine that I had cut and pasted more successfully. I can almost guarantee you what's wrong here is that my indenting, which indenting matters in YAML, is way the heck out of whack. However, just imagine for yourself, actually, let's not imagine. Let's go, oh no, I deleted it from there. So what'll happen though is we're going to still add this in just to give you to give you the full example. Ooh, I'm tempted to start fixing indents on the fly. Who wants to see how badly I can do that? Oh, this is not going to work. Okay, we're not going to do that. That's going to take me forever. But so I'm going to check this in anyway, and we can still get the point of the example. So this won't work. Okay, so I saved and committed it. I'm pushing my branch. And now we're going to go back to GitHub real quick and go to GitHub. We're going to find that branch. Actually, we're just going to make a pull request. Compare them all. Oh, and we're going to, actually, this is a great opportunity to show off more Copilot stuff here. This should add a GitHub Actions file, but I think I messed it. I think I messed up the indenting. In the middle of a talk, please help. All right, let's see how it does. So I'm going to create that pull request. And so now I'm going to flip this around. And instead of asking it to solve the issue, I'm going to request it to code review. So this is the other cool thing, and I'm stealing my later thunder, but so the other cool thing you can do is use it as a code reviewer, and it is magnificent as a code reviewer. It runs circles around me because it is way more detail oriented than I am in the heat of the moment, right? You're code reviewing and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Next thing, right? It goes through every detail every single time and it finds great stuff. So why am I not getting little eyeballs? Just a review from code. Hmm. I did it already. Oh, okay. Oh, there it is. All right, finally. So pull request overview. So the PR corrects the typo on the save folder and there. Okay, so it's covering that. So it got distracted because the other PR was still in there. Okay. Well, I'm not going to belabor this, but you kind of get the gist of it, right? Is that you can go back and forth. I'm not sure how well it's going to succeed at that particular scenario. But the code reviewing is super helpful. So the point is, though, now I would have an action here. No, it's still a PR. All right, so I'm going to just merge the PR, even though I know it breaks, just so we can see the impact of it. Confirm merge. Okay. So now I've got that in my code base. So here's the .github folder, which I've nicely put in the comment that won't work. So what that did is that created an action, right? For those of you guys that are familiar with GitHub Actions. So I've got this action and it already triggered and failed to work because we saw it's the indenting's a sloppy mess in it right now. So what will happen though is the next time I gave it some work to do and it went through and tried to build, it will use this YAML file to build its environment. And the reason I'm not that concerned about it not working is because it wasn't going to work anyway, because this YAML file is telling it to use a Windows environment and Windows isn't supported yet anyway. So it would throw an exception and the action would fail. So hopefully that makes some sense. So let us take a look. Let me go back to the slides and see where I left off. I lost track with my shenanigans there. Right. So let's do one more. Let's do one more before we wrap things up. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. Wrong browser. Did I close that? Apparently I closed that browser. All right, we'll get there. We'll go behind that. So now I just put in, of course, something that's going to break it. So we'll have to fix that as well. Shoot, I shouldn't have done that. So let's fix that real quick. So we're going to go back, pull main, Solution Explorer. Why didn't that pull in? Did I not merge? Was anybody paying attention while I was doing? Already up to date. What did I do? Oh, I never merged it, did I? Excellent. Okay, well, so let's create a new issue. Do something a little more interesting. Let's support more holidays. Currently, this is focused on Advent and Christmas. We need to add support for what's some good holidays here? Easter, Valentine's Day, Halloween. What else should I put in there? What's that? 4th of July, thank you. 4th of July. Okay, that's 4. So again, a pretty lousy issue. And this is probably one of the things I've been most impressed with. Even when I do these really lousy issues, I'm still seeing really great results coming out of it. So let's assign this to Copilot. Go figure that out. And so this is going to take a couple minutes. So let's go back to the slides while that takes place. And I'd like to show you guys one more example from my other project while we wait for that to complete. So after I got pretty far along with implementing that feature, I got to a point where I released it into the store in a test build, and I found that there was a crash and a couple other things, right? So I documented it, and I said to myself, well, I see what's wrong. I don't need to have Copilot do this. I can go fix this real quick. So I made this issue, and I did my usual quality documentation, and of 4 words. So this should resolve number 43 and number 44. And I probably, I went ahead and did that, and then I assigned it to Copilot for a review. And so Copilot went through, and it took a look at the things it did. And we'll come back to here in a second, but let's skip to what it actually came back with. Oops, shoot. So it said that this line right here is wrong, if not result and result 2, which it totally wasn't. The logic actually should be not result 1 and not result 2, or spin it a different way. So it actually picked up on that and said this condition only returns false when the game version is outdated and expansions match. Which is not what I meant, and somehow it discerned that that is not what I meant. So it suggested a change. So here's the fun thing. Not only did it find the error, it suggested the thing, and it gave me a nice little button where I could just commit its suggestion on how to fix it. So it told me why I did that was dumb. Then it gave me the suggested code fix. So it kind of did all the heavy lifting for me. So went ahead and did that. And then here it complained about this code, saying that repeated checks for file existence should be consolidated. Now, while I do agree with what it's saying, I prefer the clarity of how I wrote it. So I did not commit that suggestion. So it gave me one good thing and one that I didn't like. But the point is, it gave me really good feedback there. Both of those were very, very valid bits of feedback that it gave me. And in fact, it also had another bit of feedback, which it suppressed due to low confidence in it. It said the names result 1 and result 2 are ambiguous. Consider renaming them to is game version up to date and is expansions version up to date for clarity. That's way better. It's totally right? I used some really lousy names. So that's the kind of feedback, though, that it was able to give me when I did a code review. Now, for me working solo on this project, that is gold. Like having a code reviewer on something where nobody else would be looking at the code is fabulous, especially when it finds legit mistakes that I made there. And so as I've been proceeding forward using this, I've been using it to code review every single thing I do. I've been using it to resolve issues, and I've even gone so far as had it write a bunch of code. We went back and forth, and eventually I said, okay, I see how I want to finish this. I did the final commit, right? So back and forth. I did the final commit, then I had it review me fixing its work. So we kind of went back and forth. And it really provided great results every time. So let's go to our final example here and see how it's going. Almost done. So it's almost done here. So let's start taking a look at it, actually. So it starts by analyzing the current code base. It wants to add a holiday selection box, create a method to generate holiday-specific system messages. So that is impressive right there, because I did not tell it to do that, but you absolutely would need to do that for it to work. And when we look at the code that it wrote, we'll be able to see why that's needed. Let's see how we're doing. Open. It's the song and dance part. Okay, we'll come back there in a second. So I do want to look at that. So let me kind of go through the wrap up and then we'll go back to that last example. So, a lot of you guys, if you've heard me, you've seen me use this slide before, maybe even, where, vibe coding is clown coding, right? A lot of that's emerging. And well, it's getting more complicated now. You can't just say that vibe coding is just simply clown coding. What I'd like to tell people now is, in my opinion, being able to effectively use these tools, like what we're seeing, sort of, at least for the examples I did that worked, right? That is part of being an effective developer in today's modern tool landscape. That still doesn't mean, though, that random business user is going to go spin up a enterprise level startup all by themselves, just going back and forth with this code. But we're certainly getting another step closer. So, for those of you that are feeling very anti-vibe coding, don't let that discourage you from going and chasing this tooling. This tooling is absolutely something for a highly skilled developer to use and to get efficiencies out of. And as you progress further and further with this tooling and learn how to work with your new coworker, you will find that you're able to use it even more effectively. Let's see if that was enough time for it to finish. It was. All right, so let's see what it did. Actually, I'll tell you what will be even more fun. Let's just get the code and see what happened. So we're going to go and find that. And so now we got fix 3. So this is the code. We're going to just run it and see what it does. And then we'll take a look at the code. Fingers crossed. When I tried this one at home, it did get it right on the first try. So we now have a holiday dropdown. So let's switch it. Valentine's Day. Santa hanging out with the Easter Bunny for Halloween. Oh, awesome. So notice it did not put a key in. So let's go grab the key real quick, because now I'm really curious. I especially want to see what that prompt I just came up with is going to do. So let's see. I had that in my PowerPoint deck. More scene. There it is. Yep, I remembered. All right, so we said Halloween, Santa hanging out with the Easter Bunny. I sure hope this works. So that part worked good. So now the interesting tidbit is I had hard coded that what's feeding into that was Christmas related. So that means it picked up on that hard coding and did it. Oh, look at that. Where's the Easter Bunny though? I don't see him. Oh, look at that. Wow. Oh, it is Halloween, I suppose. Wow. Okay. Well, nice job. I better save that image. So let's take a look though, especially at that hard-coded bit, because I really, I gave it no guidance on how to deal with that situation. Here we go. So you can see here's what's hard-coded in there for Christmas. Create a prompt for Dolly that will generate a beautiful Christmas scene, blah, blah, blah. So what it actually did is it picked up on that. It realized it needs a different one of those for each holiday, and it even came up with what the text should be to go there. So that's pretty darn impressive, right? So it picked up on some of the subtlety of the application that really, the level of reasoning and understanding that's going on there, really, if you stop and think about it, is just amazing. I know I was blown away. And it's because it has that level of comprehension of your code base and what's really going on with the code base that this actually works and is worth using. If it didn't get this sort of stuff, this would be too painful to use, I think. So let's wrap up in the slides here. I want to show one more thing. Let's see, time-wise, I think we'll skip that slide. And then we'll swap these. Okay. So the final thing I want to leave you with is, well, how the heck do I get started on this? So you showed me something cool. It's only existed for a few weeks. What do I do to get started? So the first bit is this is a GitHub feature. So if you are sitting in Azure DevOps right now, as many of you probably are, who's in Azure DevOps right now? Okay, the bulk of you. So if you're sitting in Azure DevOps, you are not going to be between those two products so that you can integrate back and forth, having issues pointing to PBIs and all those sorts of things so that they can work collaboratively. And the current best practice is to use Azure DevOps for pipelines and for boards, to use GitHub Enterprise for issues and for repositories. So those are the best practices right now. And the integrations that are in place are there to facilitate that. There is a really nice migration path that is documented inside of the GitHub Enterprise documentation that explains how to make the move and how to enable that integration. And they've even gone so far as to include a free Azure DevOps license with every GitHub Enterprise license. So if you go and purchase your GitHub Enterprise licenses, you don't have to pay for your Azure DevOps license anymore. However, if you're like most people, most of those are coming from Visual Studio subscriptions. That's at least most of the clients I work with. But anyway, so that is the path forward that you're supposed to be on right now, and that's supposed to be the forward path for Azure DevOps users for many, many years to come. And I know you're probably saying, yeah, right. GitHub Enterprise is the forward path. And so when a couple months ago, when I saw Martin Woodward, I asked him that very question, and he told me that at least 10 years going forward, Azure DevOps will continue. And they really have no end in sight. So I just want to put that out there because I know that was the first thing that crossed my mind. But anyway, so after you do the very simple procedure of getting GitHub Enterprise rolled out 6 months later, you can start using these features. So and what you need to do is you need to be on at least a GitHub team plan, which is a $4 license. So each of your users needs to have that. So that's kind of the least expensive of the organizational licenses. So you need to have that. And then once you have that in place, you'll see that there is a new field here. There's a new Copilot section here. And the Coding Agent preview feature is there. And you can turn that on for certain repositories or all repositories. So that's all there is to it, though, to enable it. So it's really simple once you're in GitHub Enterprise to turn that on. Because most likely, if you guys are rolling out GitHub Enterprise, you're going to have an appropriate license to use with this. So my suggestion is start figuring out how you can add your newest team member and start doing it immediately so that you can open up the next level of productivity. And I really do, that's not me quoting the Microsoft marketing speak. I really feel like this opens up productivity the same way that we had another level of productivity when we got GitHub Copilot. So thank you, everyone. There's kind QR code to my LinkedIn, and there is my email address if anybody would like to get in touch. Thank you, everyone. Does anybody have questions? Yes, that's right where I was going. Indeed. Yes. That is because they started counting premium requests this morning. So that is a new feature that they're tracking that and charging. So you get, I want to say it's about 300 or 350 per person, but they just started charging for that today. They just started figuring out how to monetize it. So the reason my other ones were zero is because they turned on the feature today and those didn't use any of those.
Per person per day?
Per person, I think it's per month. I'm not sure. Indeed, and you can buy additional. You can spend a couple bucks to get additional ones. I don't know exactly because it really did just pop out today. So I'm not sure of the exact details. I do know you can buy additional ones, and I do know that it's a preview feature, and they're still trying to figure it out. My suspicion is the reason they turned it on while it's in public preview like this is because they were their eyes were bugging out at the amount of compute that was being used by people doing stuff like what I was just showing. Because I'm sure I'm not the only one that got excited and started cranking away as fast as I could. I saw, yes, Damon.
So I work in
I haven't taken it that far yet. However, I talked to some Microsoft folks about that very topic at Build, and they are actually optimizing some of those use cases, some very particular ones, that being one of them, like what's your path forward from WinForms, but also a big one they're focusing on right now is how do I get out of .NET Framework and into .NET Core, because there's still a lot of people that are stuck with .NET Framework, and it is well past getting that fixed. But yeah, so they're focusing on that. They're testing and training for those particular use cases, and you can actually find in the docs documentation about different ways to chase that. And in fact, coming soon in some of the Visual Studio updates, you know how there's that right-click menu to update from X to Y, from old version to new version. Well, some of those are going to be driven by this technology in future versions. You could, but my gut, based on what I've used so far, is that you're not going to be able to type in, this is an untestable mess, fix this garbage. And you're not even going to be able to say, hey, this is WinForms, can you get me some XAML instead or something like that. You're probably going to need to break it down into a little bit more grabbable issues. So maybe decomposing it into 10 or 20 issues. And then I think you'd have a great deal of success. The personal example I used, which was a big feature that actually crossed two different services that were deployed. It crossed the front end and a NuGet library too, right? So I crossed all those different boundaries. I wasn't able to do that all as one issue. I decomposed it like I normally would into like 6 different things. And then I had it working on each of those different things independently. And I kind of helped it out a little bit by putting my architect hat on and saying, when you go and add this to the service, here is how I would like that to be presented to the end user, right? Here's the RESTful interface. So I gave it some clues. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You for sure. Yeah, and that's where the Copilot instructions.md file would come in handy. You would put that in there, and then that would kind of inform all of the issues that you're dragging forward. That being said, I don't think you would be able to silver bullet this, even if you did decompose it, but you might be able to shave a bunch of time off. We're actually just starting to dip our toes into this for a client. So a couple months from now, I can give you a better answer for that based on how that turns out. But yeah, it definitely helps though. The example, the first thing I did with this was turning something that was using Flask into Fast API. That was a pretty significant architectural change that crossed, 50 different files in a project, and it did okay. It needed a lot of work, but it saved a lot of work too. So I think just having that kind of grounded in reality perspective, you're going to get good value. Yes. So far, just the one. From what I understand, though, eventually you'll be able to switch. And that they need to do that for certain enterprise users, approve only certain models. So that they need to, but currently there is no support, and I don't even know what model I'm using there. Based on how it's performing, it's certainly a reasoning model, but I'm not sure which one it even is. Yeah. It absolutely does, yes. I've the example there was actually using MudBlazer. So that one totally relied on MudBlazer, and I was very pleased when it actually understood what MudBlazer was and built out. When it built that brand new page, it actually built as a MudBlazer page. It didn't just build as a standard Blazor page. So yeah, it's been pretty good about that. And you could potentially ground it with additional information. If it didn't know a lot about a particular library, you could actually add that into your repository. And then in the MD file, that markdown file, you could say this SDK is documented in this PDF. And it would actually leverage that knowledge. So if you did run into it, but stuff like Telerik, I think these coding models have a pretty good handle on Telerik. Yeah.
So in one of the slides, it was showing how it was reasoning, and it did like a git diff or something. Is it like really searching through version history to try to pull in context to do? Because like that's exactly what I do, right? Like,
Yep. It absolutely does, yeah. That's part of its secret sauce, is that it walks across the repro and it's looking for history that may be potentially relevant. It will do it, and you'll see it in many of the sessions. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, because that's like so much better than like the Git Copilot.
Yeah, I feel like they took a bunch of developers and watched how they worked, and then kind of built that out. Is really what it feels like when you go and look through those sessions. Because yeah, it's a lot of stuff like I would do this too if I was chasing this problem. Here's how I would research it. It absolutely does do that stuff though. Yeah, there was somebody, yes. Yes, it is. It is, and because it's been around for a bit, and so you can find some fabulous examples. Like that's why a lot of that language I was showing wasn't mine. That was just, I found a good example that was neat, and I put that in here. But there's great examples for various stacks that are really helpful.
So you mentioned that the code is compiled in Linux environments.
Mm-hmm. It's the same cost as running GitHub Actions. So whatever you have set up for GitHub Actions, if you're hosting your own private build server, then whatever that costs. If you're just using the cloud-based ones, there's a whole bunch of free that you get with your account, but it's leveraging that. If I had gotten that, I know that was the one thing that didn't work, but if I had gotten that to work, you would see it look just like a GitHub action executing where it built the environment, compiled, and then checked out that way. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you again. And Jason, did you have anything else? Where's Jason? Oh, there he is.